close your eyes for a second. Think about the first person you ever fell for. That rush of excitement, that feeling in your chest that you couldn't quite explain, and then think about how it ended. First you couldn't understand it, then you didn't want to accept it, and eventually, you just buried it. But here's where things get strange. You move on, you meet someone new, and sure, the name is different, the job is different, the face is different, but the way the relationship unfolds? The way it makes you feel? The fights that always seem to happen? The way it ends? Uncomfortably familiar. The first time, you call it bad luck. The second time, you tell yourself you just picked wrong again. By the third time, something quietly shifts inside you, and one night, in the stillness, you finally ask yourself the question you've been avoiding. Why do I keep ending up with the same person? Look, that's not just your story. That's a question millions of people carry around, usually in silence. Some get confused by it, some get angry, and a lot of people end up blaming themselves. Today, I want to actually answer that question. What pulls us back to the same patterns? And more importantly, what are we really supposed to find at the end of that cycle? After a relationship ends, most of us make a promise to ourselves. Never again. If they were cold and emotionally unavailable, next time you want someone warm. If they were controlling, next time you want someone who gives you space. If they were unreliable, next time you want someone steady. Completely reasonable. So why does that promise keep falling apart? Here's what psychology tells us. Psychologist John Bowlby developed what's known as attachment theory, and inside that framework, there's a concept called the internal working model. Think of it as your brain's unconscious blueprint for what love is supposed to look like. Is love something stable or something anxious? Does the person you love stay, or do they leave? Are you someone who deserves to be loved without conditions? Or do you always have to earn it? Now here's the part that matters. This blueprint isn't built consciously. You didn't sit down as a kid and decide what love means. It got written into you through experience, through the way the adults around you showed up, or didn't show up, consistently. And this is where it gets wild. If you grew up around someone whose emotions were unpredictable, someone who was warm one day and distant the next, your nervous system learned to read that pattern as normal, as safe. And your brain, when it encounters that same unpredictability in a new person, it doesn't raise an alarm. It says, I know this, because your brain doesn't ask, is this good for me? First, it asks, do I recognize this? And it reaches toward what it knows. There's a related idea in psychology sometimes called repetition compulsion. The unconscious tendency to recreate familiar relationship dynamics from the past. Your head might be saying no, absolutely not, but something deeper says yes, this feels like home. For example, someone who grew up in an emotionally cold environment might find themselves drawn to partners who are distant and hard to reach, not because they enjoy it, but because somewhere beneath the surface, there's this quiet, completely unconscious drive to finally crack that shell, to finally get the love that was withheld. Now you might be thinking, so I'm just stuck like this forever? No, you're not, but there's something you have to be willing to face first, and that's where the next part of this comes in. The excitement you feel when you meet someone new? That's real. The hope that this time is different? That's real too. And for the first few months, it really does seem different. They text back. They're considerate. They actually listen. You think, see? I've grown. I finally know how to pick. But slowly, almost quietly, something familiar starts to seep through. A comment here, a pattern there, and then one day it hits you somewhere deep in your gut. You felt this before. The way arguments unfold is the same. The way you hold back your anger is the same. The way you end up apologizing first is the same. The way you sit alone afterward and process the hurt by yourself is the same. The cast has changed. The script hasn't. And at this point, most people blame the other person, which honestly makes sense. It's so much easier to say, they had issues. But if you're willing to go a little deeper, you'll hit something uncomfortable. When they pulled away, what did you do? Did you try harder to please them? When they broke a promise, did you actually say something, or did you let it go? When things started to feel off, Did you speak up, or did you pretend everything was fine? The other person changed. Your responses mostly didn't. Now, I want to be clear. This isn't about beating yourself up. It's actually the opposite. Because most people look away at exactly this point. It feels easier to walk away believing it was entirely someone else's fault. And yeah, your pain is valid, but relationships are built by two people. So the real question is, what role were you playing? Psychology tells us we tend to carry the same relational roles from one relationship to the next. The one who always soothes, the one who always gives in, the one who always loves more, the one who always holds back anger until it explodes. You carry those roles with you no matter who the other person is. It's like changing your travel destination, but packing the exact same suitcase every single time. Recognizing that pattern? It's painful, I won't lie to you, but that pain is also exactly where real change begins. Here's something true about experience. It builds, even when it feels like you're going in circles. Something is quietly accumulating. In your first relationship, you just hurt. You didn't even know why. In your second, you started recognizing the feeling a little faster. Something in you remembered. By your third, you could almost see the early signs forming. You couldn't stop it yet, but you could see it. And then one day, you pause. You pause at a comment you would have let slide before. You think, wait, this isn't okay, when, before you would have said, it's fine. Don't overreact. That pause, that single second of hesitation? That's actually huge, because that's the moment a boundary begins to form inside you. When people hear the word boundary, they usually picture a wall, a coldness, a closing off. But boundaries aren't about shutting people out, they're about keeping the relationship alive. A boundary is just you saying, this isn't how I want to be loved. It's not a rejection of someone else. It's a declaration about yourself. And those boundaries don't appear overnight. They're built slowly, through repetition, through falling down in the same place enough times that your nervous system finally says, no, not this time. That's why the failed relationships aren't just painful memories. They're data. They show you exactly where you're vulnerable, exactly which words knock you down, exactly which roles you keep volunteering for. And when that data accumulates, your behavior starts to shift. For the first time, you tell someone when something bothers you, instead of swallowing it whole. For the first time, you let go of something earlier than you would have before. For the first time, you stop shrinking yourself so someone else will choose you, and you start being the one who chooses. Now, this process is messier than it sounds. The first time you hold a boundary, you will feel anxious. What if they leave? Am I being too sensitive? Am I making this weird? Those thoughts will flood in, and honestly, that anxiety makes sense, because deep down, there's an old fear sitting there, a fear that was probably formed long before you were old enough to name it. The fear that if you ask for what you need, love will disappear. But here's what happens when you hold that boundary anyway. Something shifts. If they respect it, you get to feel, maybe for the first time, what a healthy dynamic actually feels like, not just as a concept in your body. And if they don't respect it, if they get angry or push back, that's information too. That's the relationship showing you what it actually is. Experience becomes knowledge. Knowledge becomes judgment. Judgment becomes choice. That's what real growth looks like. Not a dramatic overnight transformation. Just you, today, being 1 degree more aware of yourself than you were yesterday. 1 second longer before you react. 1 conversation you actually have instead of having it only in your head. 1 relationship you let go of slightly earlier than the last. Those small shifts accumulate, and one day you turn around and realize you've traveled much further than you thought. Now we're at the heart of it. Is the pattern a curse? Are you just unlucky? Is there genuinely no one good out there? No. Here's the truth.
When similar relationships keep showing up, it's often a signal. A signal that there's something inside you. An emotional pattern, a familiar response, an old habit of the heart that hasn't fully been understood yet. Unfinished emotional business. Things you never quite said to yourself. And similar patterns can keep reappearing in different relationships, until you begin to recognize them clearly. That's not blame. That's not you being broken. That's just how unresolved emotional patterns tend to work. And here's the shift that actually changes everything. Changing who you date isn't enough. Finding someone kinder, more mature, more attentive? Yes, that matters. But before that, and I mean this, what has to change is who you are inside that relationship. How much you respect yourself. What treatment you accept as normal. How much of yourself you're willing to protect. When that shifts, the kind of relationships you choose and remain in can shift too. And I want to be clear about what I mean. This is not about trying harder. This is not just be better and you'll find better. This is about something simpler and more important than that. This is about you knowing, truly knowing, that you are already enough.
When you chronically push your own feelings to the back of the line, you'll end up tolerating relationships that don't actually have room for you. When you're used to suppressing what you feel, you might not even catch the warning signs early enough. The standard you hold for yourself becomes the floor for what you allow from others. So the real shift isn't finding a better person, it's becoming a better person to yourself first. Look back at every relationship that didn't work out. Notice what you felt. Notice the moments you lost yourself. Notice which words cut the deepest. Those aren't just painful memories collecting dust. Those experiences may have taught you more about your patterns than you realized at the time. Because of those experiences, you know yourself today with a clarity you simply didn't have before. We tend to imagine growth as some kind of lightning bolt moment. One day you wake up transformed. Everything is clear. You never make the same mistake again. But real growth doesn't work like that. Real growth is pausing 1 second longer in the same situation that used to swallow you whole. It's saying out loud something you used to only feel. It's letting go just slightly earlier than last time. Those small moments stack, and one day you turn around and realize you've traveled much further than you thought. The fact that you keep meeting the same kind of love isn't proof that something is wrong with you. It might just be proof that there's a part of you still waiting to be understood, still waiting for you to turn toward it. And the fact that you're here, right now, listening to this, that's already evidence that something in you has begun to change. You've made it through every single one of those relationships, every one, and each one left you more clear-eyed than before, even when it didn't feel that way at the time. That kind of quiet strength doesn't announce itself, but it's there, and one day, you'll walk into a new relationship carrying all of that, and for the first time, you'll be able to love someone fully, without losing yourself in the process. Not a love built on anxiety, not a love where you're always bracing for the other shoe to drop, a love built on something steadier, something you recognize not because it's familiar, but because it finally feels right. That's what you've been searching for, and it's exactly what you deserve. Now, I know something might have come up while you were listening to all of this, a question sitting just below the surface. Okay, but why am I even wired this way? What's the part of me I still haven't looked at? That's exactly what we're exploring next time. The patterns inside you that may be pulling you toward the wrong relationships. The parts of yourself you may not have fully understood yet. You won't want to miss it.